represent the 28 stars, the divine beings who descended from heaven to attend and assist the Supreme Being in the great divine temple. You will notice that the Palace of 9 Degrees of the Evolution is divided into 9 stepped levels. Each of the 9 levels, as they rise through the temple, is flanked by 2 columns. There are 18 in all. Each column is decorated with a green dragon. These descended from the roof. Their mouths are open to spread the message of the way. Looking up, you will notice the 9 sky and altar decorated cupolas. The ceiling rose decorations directly above you consists of 6 dragons intermeshed. 2 red, 2 green, and 2 yellow. They remind the community that God the Father travels the universe borne by 6 dragons as he observes and encourages souls on their path to enlightenment. Above and to the side of that part of the roof, over the balconies, you can see decorations in the roof which consists of carving of a phoenix, a turtle, and a unicorn. Together with the dragons, these carvings represent the 4 mythical creatures. The appearance of these creatures hails the coming of good fortune.
At the 5th column along, and at about half the height of a column, stand 2 pulpits. These are entered by a winding staircase, and it is from here that high dignitaries deliver sermons and direct rituals. Supporting the pulpits are 6 threads of a cloud projected from the mouth of the dragons. The pulpit is constructed following the story of King Fa Yu of the Chinese State War era. Confucius went to King Fa Yu to teach about human virtues and was imprisoned for 2 years. When Confucius was released, King Fa Yu had 6 vows: not to see Confucius, not to listen to Confucius, not to smell Confucius, not to talk to Confucius, not to touch Confucius, and not to accept the return of Confucius. The vows correspond to the 6 secular senses from the 6 senses of human eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and mind. Because of his attitudes against moral virtues, his country subsequently sustained many natural disasters. King Fa Yu then set up a tower to pray to God. By order of God, He Jiangung came to the tower ordering King Fa Yu to invite Confucius to teach human moral virtues to the people of the country. People should cultivate themselves and control their 6 senses in order to live in peace and with each other. Thereafter, the country was in peace and free of disasters. Upon reaching the 9th level of the Palace of 9 Degrees of Evolution, you will see thrones laid out in 3 rows. The first row contains only 1 throne. The remaining rows contain 3 each. The first seat is the high single throne and is for the Pope. The 3 behind are for the legislative cardinals. The final 3 are for the remaining cardinals. In front and on each side of the thrones is a set of 8 staff insignia, which are the precious objects or pikes of the 8 Taoist immortals. In Taoist mythology, the 8 beings who, as mortals, followed the way and achieved the statues of enlightened spirits. Resting on both ends and in between these staffs are 2 sets of 3 ceremonial parasols, traditional symbols of respect and veneration. On each side of the throne is a set of 3 parasols, traditional symbols of respect and veneration. After you have passed the 9th step, past the thrones, and past the staffs and parasols of the 8 Taoist immortals, you will enter the 10th step, this area known as the spiritual palace. This small area ends just before the main altar. This is the area in which official communication takes place between the religious mediums and the spiritual world. It is here that the names of newly elected officials of each hierarchy are placed before the divine beings for ratification. It is also in this area where significant problems facing the community are brought in hope that the divine advice will offer a solution. If you look above your head, you will notice that the ceiling rose contains representations of all the different methods of spiritualist communication.
Between the spiritual palace area and the altar are 3 canopies in blue, red, and yellow. The central canopy contains statues of 8 of the most significant religious figures in Taoism. On the top row, middle, is the statue of Sakyamuni Buddha, known also by his earthly name Gautama Siddhartha. This son of an Indian king, living in the 6th century BC, was the first to unveil the way that leads from earthly suffering and cycles of reincarnation to the paradise of nirvana. His life and work is celebrated by all Buddhists. Top row female side is Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is the foremost master of Taoism. His book, The Tao Te Ching, is a highly enigmatic and spiritual book that allows complete operation of the way of life. Top row male side is Confucius. This great master of Chinese religious and philosophical thought lived between 551 and 479 BC. He edited and codified the 5 Chinese classics in which all societal and familial behavior is codified. Next row down, female side, is the Chinese immortal Kuan Yin. She is celebrated as a great and supremely helpful spirit. When she heard the prayers and agonies of the world and turned back from the threshold of paradise in order to assist the world. In the middle of the row is the famous 7th century Chinese poet and immortal Li Po. This great soul appeared during the early seance of the religion and helped to guide it during its formative period. Li Po was also responsible for directing the whole FAP in the construction of the Great Divine Temple. On the male side is the Chinese god of war and loyalty, Huang Kong, one of the most popular gods in China. Holiness, the whole FAP, revealed that Huang Kong disincarnated and then, after spending 500 years studying the way, was finally elevated to Buddhahood. In the middle of the second last row, representing the Western monotheism, is the Lord Jesus Christ. He represents all 3 major Western monotheism: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. At the bottom center, representing Jainism, is Jiang Ziza. As the Chinese kingdom sank further into chaos at the time of the fall of the Shang dynasty, Noting the perilous state of the kingdom, Jiang Ziza accepted Prince Wu's invitation to become prime minister and exercising his great virtue, and helping to coordinate many spiritual forces, helped to save the state.
On the female side of the temple, the canopy is recessed to contain the statues of the 8 immortals. The 8 immortals are extremely popular in Asian society. They represent an ideal happiness and possess special magical abilities. They are also figures of great veneration, appearing in many myths as being of high ethical standards, seeking revenge and playing tricks on those who deal corruptly and unfairly with the common people. They are very important in relation to the magical powers associated with the 8-sided trigrams box.
Canopy on the male side of the altar has 7 figures recessed into it. These 7 saints belong to an epic period of Chinese history, much celebrated throughout the Chinese world. The book that refers to them is called the Fengshan Yangyi. It is a seminal work of great religious significance, equivalent to Homer's Iliad for Greek civilization, or the Mahabharata for the Indian world. These 7 were bound to follow the instructions of their spiritual master, who had asked them to help King Wu of Chou comes to vanquish King Chou of Shang. King Wu and his prime minister Jiang Ziza moved to have these saints defied. However, these saints who have come from the mountains to help in the battle remain humble, and once the job is done, wish to return to their lives of Taoist meditation.
The last palace of the temple is the 8 trigrams palace. This divine section represents both the spirit and the soul of the new religion. Where the palace of 9 degree of the evolution is entrusted with the conversion of souls, the 8 trigrams palace is concerned with the salvation of souls. And as God the Father heads the 8 trigrams palace, it is He who is ultimately the spirit and soul of the new religion. The 2 yellow dragon columns underneath these altar canopies mark the beginning of the most holy area in the great divine temple. The 8 trigrams palace is the place where all Taoists worship God the Father and the divine beings. Whenever a ceremony is held, this is where God the Father and the divine beings reside. There are 8 yellow dragon columns that surround the altar area. Heads of these dragons are facing the divine altar as though they are great spirits worshiping and accompanying God the Father. As its name suggests, the altar is fashioned with 8 sides. It rises from the ground on 12 steps. Each step becomes smaller as they ascend. There are 12 steps in reference to a divine message delivered by God in which He revealed that the number 12 was His divine number. Around each side of this 8-sided altar are representations of the divinatory trigrams of Taoism, although these are inscribed on the uppermost steps of the tower of the 8 trigrams palace. They have been oriented in a special way in order to accommodate the spirit of the 8 trigrams palace. At the center of the uppermost step is the central pillar holding up the universal globe, which literally means the coming together of the heaven and earth into a spherical shape. Its construction was conveyed to Archbishop Tai Bin Tan on the 17th of September, 1926. You might notice on the front of this globe the constellation of the Big Dipper. God the Father revealed to the Kaudai religion that at the peak of his constellation, he could be found, and so it is above this constellation that the divine eye is placed, facing outwards, the palace of 9 degrees of evolution. In Kaudaist cosmology, there are 36 heavens, 3,000 worlds, 4 great cosmic regions, and 72 planets. Planet Earth is number 68. Representing all these worlds and planets, there are 3,072 stars marked on the globe. The most significant of all Kaudaist imagery is that of the Great Divine Eye. The Divine Eye is also represented above the home altars of Kaudaists, and so in spirit and in pictorial representation, it is seen throughout the entire Kaudaist community. The eye is a universally potent symbol of the divine. The eye sees and it knows. Because it knows, it is able to protect us and check upon us. Many tourists liken the presence of the eye symbol to something similar found on the American $1 bill, a symbol that can be traced back to Masonic imagery. However, the mystic and the universal symbolism of the divine eye extends throughout the religious history of the world. For the ancient Egyptians, there was the eye of Horus. For the Hindus, the third eye of Shiva. The Buddha is said to have received inner enlightenment through the celestial eye, and this permitted him to see the life of all beings simultaneously and gave him knowledge of the chain of the fundamental forces of existence. The divine eye throughout history is also there to remind us that as God watches us, so too must we keep watch over ourselves in order to follow the ways of heaven. The divine eye is the main symbol of worship in Kaudai religion. A God's message on the 25th of February, 1926, proclaimed, "The eye is the master of the heart. The 2 energy sources are the master. Energy is the spirit is God. God is me." Esoterically, for cultivation of spiritual energy, worshippers must train and concentrate their own eyes on the divine eye during worship. The altar table is also marked by 8 white and silver dragons. Heads of the dragons are facing out. They are on the positions of protecting and maintaining the solemnity of God's altar and the worshiping area. Underneath the universal globe are the names of the masters of the various religious traditions that the Kaudaists venerate. These are on tablets in Chinese characters.
The layout of the altar of the Great Divine Temple is complex. The following illustration is the basis pattern of God's altar. On the altar, the following symbols are displayed. The divine eye. This, the single common characteristic of every Kaudai God's altar. The divine eye became the main worshipping symbol of the Kaudai religion. The lamp symbolized the universal monad, which is the eternal light of the universe. This lamp should remain constantly lit. These offerings represents the 3 essential elements of our constitution. Flowers and fruits represent matter, wine the vital energy, and T, the soul. The three essential elements of the universe are heaven, earth, and humanity. The heaven is essentially constituted by the sun, the moon, and the stars. The earth is essentially constituted by water, fire, and ether. Man is